This is Divorce Court, presided over by Judge William Keene. In the case we'll be seeing today, Linda McCall is suing Charles McCall, her husband of 2 years, for divorce on the grounds of mental cruelty and adultery. Mr. McCall is countersuing on grounds of mental cruelty.
All right, I call this case of McCall versus McCall now. Is the plaintiff ready?
Yes, Your Honor.
Is the defendant ready?
Yes, Your Honor.
Mr. Dart, do you desire to make an opening statement?
Yes, Your Honor. Your Honor, Linda McCall thought she was marrying a respectable artist and musician. Instead, he turned out to be nothing but a lying adulterer. Indeed, after she got him a prestigious job at the orchestra, he quit without telling her so he could take up with his street woman. My client seeks a divorce on the grounds of mental cruelty and adultery. She asks for the car, the silver, 100% of the marital assets, and $1,000 a month in spousal support. Thank you.
Mr. Sturgis, do you want to reserve your opening statement or make it now?
I'll make it now, Your Honor.
All right.
Your Honor, the defense is countersuing for divorce on grounds of mental cruelty. The evidence will establish that the defendant is a serious musician who did his best to provide a happy home for his wife. But the plaintiff was never satisfied and actually manufactured false adultery charges to get out of the marriage. Thus, the defendant asked for divorce and that he be awarded the car, the silver, and 75% of the marital assets.
Mr. Dart, your first witness, please.
Your Honor, I call Linda McCall to the stand.
Mrs. McCall, step forward.
Now taking the stand is Linda McCall, the plaintiff. Mr. McCall claims his wife, a beautician, is a compulsive spender and that her habits drove him to quit his orchestra job and become a street musician. He claims his wife is only concerned with status and cares nothing for his happiness.
I do.
All right, let me hear from the plaintiff.
When you first met your husband, he was an unemployed musician. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right. I heard him playing at a friend's party. He was incredibly talented. I asked him if he was a professional musician, and he just shrugged. He said he guessed he needed someone to get on his case and keep him moving. I said, "You've got soul but no goal," and he laughed and asked me out. We started a fling that night, and a month later he proposed to me.
And did you agree to marry then?
No. I said I wouldn't marry a bum without a job. Well, one of my clients at the beauty shop was the assistant manager at the county symphony, and I got Charles an audition. Well, he blew his trumpet and blew them away. They hired him on the spot.
Did he stay with that job?
No. A little while after that, he got into this big fight with the conductor. He said that the man was stifling his creativity or something. So I told him that he was being a prima donna, and he got furious. So just to patch things up, I took him to this jazz club that he really liked. You can imagine how surprised I was when this waitress came up and called him horny. And by the way she was eyeing his zipper, it wasn't because he played the trumpet.
A move to strike, Your Honor. That's pure speculation.
All right, that motion is granted. That portion of the answer is stricken. Go ahead, Mr.
Did your husband accuse you of being a spendthrift?
Well, he went out and bought a $2,000 trumpet, but he complained about everything I bought. You know, I bought this sexy dress one Valentine's Day, and he ripped it off my back and said I only wanted him for his money.
And what did you say in response to that?
Well, I said if all I wanted was money, I wouldn't have married a musician. You know, he just said he wasn't earning enough and he needed to get a second job, so he got this club gig working every night he wasn't at the orchestra. I never saw him. He just didn't know how much I missed him, and when he was around, he'd just lock himself away in the study.
Now, did you ever find out why he was behaving this way towards you?
Yes. Some friends and I decided that we'd go and surprise Charles backstage after the concert. Well, the stage manager told me that he'd been fired 2 months before. Well, my friends took me to get a drink, and as on our way there, I saw Charles with Carol Corona playing Let's Get Physical on the street. After they finished playing, she threw himself into his arms and they kissed. The crowd just loved it. I was sick.
Did you confront your husband?
Yes, I did. I tried to talk to him, but he went crazy. He started yelling at me and threatening me. He said that what he did was none of my business and I should get out of his life, and he threw some things in a suitcase and just stormed out of the house.
When did you see him again?
The next day. I thought he might be at his girlfriend's house, so I looked up her address in the phone book and went over there. I wanted to patch things up. Well, I could see what was happening through the window. He was playing his trumpet, and she was wearing some kind of peekaboo nightie and kissing his neck. Well, I begged Charles to come home, but he just said he'd moved in with Carol for good. You know, I loved him so much. I trusted that husband of mine so much, and he left me for street trash.
Thank you, Mrs. McCall. Nothing further, Your Honor.
Cross-examination.
When you arrived at Miss Corona's apartment, didn't you merely find your husband and Miss Corona accompanying a magician who was working on his act?
Are you crazy? The only magic going on was Charles trying to make that woman's clothes disappear.
And didn't the waitresses at the jazz club know your husband only because his trumpet playing was so well known?
Yeah? Well, that wasn't all he was good at playing. Those girls had their hands all over him. He never got that close to me.
And when Mr. McCall locked himself away, wasn't he actually composing jazz pieces entitled Loves for Linda, which were dedicated to you?
The Who song sounded like two screech owls in labor. It wouldn't take a person 30 seconds to compose that noise.
Weren't your arguments with your husband not about his work, not about the lack of attention to you, but about you spending $200 on dresses?
Look, I need decent clothes to work at the salon I work on. It's a high-class place. I never spent money foolishly.
And didn't you tell your husband that you didn't mind him fooling around, but that you couldn't stay married to a bum who was begging on street corners?
You say a lot of things when you're hurt and angry. But if you think I didn't mind Charles fooling around, you're wrong.
And didn't Mr. McCall stay with Miss Corona only for a couple of days after you had locked him out of the apartment?
Well, that's no excuse. If he wanted to give our marriage a chance, he should have stayed with one of his musician buddies.
Didn't you file for divorce here because your husband refused your ultimatum to leave the music business and go to business school?
Charles didn't go to business school because he knew he couldn't cut it. He's been blowing trumpet for so long, he's got nothing but air between his ears.
Thank you very much. No further questions, Your Honor.
I want to see counsel on the bench, please. You may step down.
While Judge Keene confers with counsel, we'll take a short break.
I just want to tell you the status of my calendar is such that I've got to finish this case today, so let's move it right along.
We return now to divorce court. About to testify in behalf of Linda McCall is Mark Wing, a delicatessen employee.
All right, Miss Dark.
Mr. Wing, in your position of assistant manager of York's Deli, did you have occasion to meet Mr. McCall?
Oh, yeah. The deli is just across from the Symphony Hall, and Charles used to hang out there a lot. In fact, he was there so much, I used to ask him if he wasn't missing rehearsals. He said, sure, but who cares? With the lousy money they pay me, I might as well be here picking chickens.
What does picking chickens mean?
Picking up girls. See, Charles is a real ladies' man. He'd go up to a good-looking lady and tell her he was a member of the symphony. A lot of college girls are impressed by stuff like that. He said the only advantage to being in an orchestra was to pick up women. Sometimes he picked them up and take them to the hotel next door. One afternoon, I saw him take 2 different ladies to that hotel. I couldn't believe one guy could handle all that action.
Did you ever see Mr. McCall with Carol Corona?
Oh, sure, he brought her in lots of times. They used to sit in the corner booth and make out all afternoon. One time, I had to tell Charles to cool it. They were fooling around. My boss was getting steamed. After Charles quit the symphony, he and Carol used to perform outside the deli every morning and spend the afternoon inside, hanging all over each other.
Thank you. Nothing further, Your Honor.
Cross-examination.
Mr. Wing, hasn't the hotel next to the York's Deli been closed for renovations for the past year?
I don't know. Maybe. Okay, he took his pickups to another hotel.
And didn't
He'd have to take them somewhere.
Didn't you and Charles have a violent argument when he refused to pay a bribe for allowing him to play his trumpet in front of York's Deli?
No. He got mad because I told him he'd have to find another spot to play. My boss thought his racket was driving off the customers.
And weren't you fired after Charles told your boss about your attempted bribe arrangement?
No, I was fired because my boss was prejudiced against Orientals. I say good riddance to bigots.
Mr. Wing, aren't you here testifying today to get revenge on Mr. McCall?
I'm here because I know what a lowlife Charles is. He's just a bum who doesn't want to work for a living.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Mr. Wing, you may step down. Anything further from the plaintiff?
No, Your Honor. The plaintiff rests.
Mr. Sturgis, your first witness, please.
Your Honor, I call Charles McCall to the stand.
Step forward.
Now taking the stand is Charles McCall, the defendant. Mrs. McCall claims her husband quit his job as a trumpeter in the local symphony to spend his time with Carol Corona, a singer who was his street artist partner.
I do. All right, let me hear from the defendant.
Charles, was your wife happy when you got a job with the orchestra?
Yes. Well, not that she liked the music or anything. She couldn't tell Mozart from Manilow. It's just that somebody down there at that beauty shop told her that orchestra is the only A train uptown, and she believed it. She made me take that orchestra job. She only came to 3 of my concerts. And at each one, she nodded off after the overture.
Did she do other things that led to problems between the two of you?
Yeah. She dragged me to these fancy parties that her fancy clients were putting on, and then she said we had to party them back. So then we rented this glitzy little duplex, and we bought these antique chairs and these frilly little couches and that damn $7,000 silver set. We couldn't afford any of it. I told her, I said, you know, I got to get a second job just to make the payments.
Did you talk to her about her spending habits?
Yeah, I talked to her. Every time I talked to her about we couldn't afford something, she would just, you know, go crazy mad. The time I told her, we can't buy a brand new Volvo, she moved out on me. She stayed with her parents for about a week. And the time that I told her, hey, we can't get a what do you call it, a garbage smasher, one of those trash smashers, she didn't sleep with me. And the next day, the very next morning, she goes out and she buys it on credit. I knew I had to do something real radical to get some extra cash.
What did you do?
A little bit of everything first. I mean, I stopped writing jazz songs and I started writing pop music, hoping one would catch a bullet, maybe get a hit. And then I started auditioning for session work, and but nothing clicked. And I knew that I had done the streets before, and I knew that was my best shot. I mean, in the orchestra, I was only making about $22,000 a year, and after taxes, you know, it was nothing. But I couldn't do orchestra work and the streets, so I quit.
How much could you make playing the streets?
Well, with the streets and in the jazz club, I was clearing about $44,000 a year. I told her, I said, look, if you don't stop spending the money, I was going to have to get another gig. And she said, no, no way. I dig you being in the orchestra.
And what happened after your wife saw you performing on the streets?
Well, I came home, and there she was with a lighted match near the fireplace with all my songs in there with lighter fluid all over it. When I tried to stop her, she just threw the match in, and all my songs went up in smoke. I mean, all the songs that were going to get her whatever she wanted, up in smoke. And then she threw me out and locked the door.
That's not true. You never wrote any songs.
All right, Mrs. McCall, I've heard from you. Let me hear from your husband. Go ahead, Miss Sturgis.
Did you try to contact your wife after that?
Yeah. The next day, Carol and we got a TV gig on a local station, and I called Linda, and I thought maybe she'd come over and celebrate. You know, things were looking up. Maybe, you know, she'd take me back. Instead, she comes charging in, she throws these unpaid bills in my face and says, you can stay with your low-life friends because that's what you are.
And did you try to reconcile with your wife?
I wanted to get back together. She said, fine. After about a week, she said, okay, great. There's one stipulation, though. I got to quit music forever and enroll in some business school. Man, she didn't want me back. She wanted me out, and she knew that was going to do it.
Thank you, Charles. No further questions, Your Honor.
Mr. Dart, you may inquire.
Mr. McCall, didn't you, in fact, insist on renting that expensive apartment because of the large music room downstairs?
Yeah, I said, look, if we got to live in a money-bags place like Ribbon Hills, we might as well get someplace I could use.
And with regard to the silver set, didn't your wife, in fact, pay for that out of her own salary?
No, she did not. She paid it with credit, and guess who pays the credit cards every month?
Now, you claim your wife moved out because you refused her a car. In fact, didn't she move out because of your noisy jam sessions every night of the week with your pot-headed musician friends?
No, hey, you got to be kidding, man. You got to be kidding now. My friends never stepped foot in that house. She always was complaining about getting dirt on the rug or our music was too loud.
Mr. McCall, weren't you really fired from the orchestra because you sexually harassed the first-chair violinist?
Now,
Isn't that the truth?
That is a lie. That little virgin, she came on to me, and when I said no, she made that story up.
You claim there was a party going on at Miss Corona's apartment the night your wife came over. Then why were the two of you alone in the bedroom?
No, look, we were looking at a show, a taping of a show that we were going to be on. Now, the door was wide open.
And didn't your wife burn those papers because they were, in fact, erotic love poems to Miss Corona?
But they were poems to her. They were love songs to Linda.
Really?
Yes.
Really, I see. Does the title, Carol, My All-Night, All-Right Woman, sound like a love song to your wife?
All right, well, that song, it was for Carol to sing in our act. It was Carol's song.
Oh, come on. Nobody believes that.
McCall, that's twice. Now, I'm not going to warn you again. Now, let's finish with this witness.
Your Honor, I have nothing further for this witness.
Juliet, may I see you, please, for a minute? You may step down, Mr. McCall.
While Charles McCall leaves the stand, we have time for a break. We return now to divorce court. About to testify in behalf of Charles McCall is Carol Corona, Mr. McCall's street artist partner.
All right, Miss Sturgis.
Miss Corona, did you ever have an adulterous relationship with Mr. McCall?
Absolutely not. I just wanted to help Charles fulfill his potential. We're fellow artists, and that's where we draw the line. You see, Charles is going to be, he's an absolute genius, and he's going to be a giant someday, and everybody can see that except his wife.
And did you talk with Mrs. McCall after Mr. McCall moved out of their duplex?
Well, of course. I'm no homewrecker. I called up Carol. She finally agreed to meet me for a coffee. And I swore to her that Charles and I were only business partners. And she said it was probably much more interesting than being his bedroom partner, because the only thing that his lips were good for were blowing a trumpet.
Thank you. No further questions.
Cross-examination.
Now, didn't you seduce Mr. McCall the very first night that you rehearsed with the orchestra?
That is not true. We danced together at a party, and that's all.
Miss Corona, didn't that dancing, in fact, lead to the fact that you are right now carrying his child?
No, that is not true. Not at all.
I have here a receipt marked as Plaintiff's 1, Your Honor, for $1,000 worth of nursery furniture charged to Mr. McCall's credit card. Now, are you going to deny that this furniture was delivered to your house?
No, I'm not going to deny it. I bought some furniture, so what? I want to have a kid someday. And the only reason why Charles used his credit card is because he owed me some money.
Now, Miss Corona, I happen to know that your OBGYN doctor is Dr. David Ehrman. It would be very easy for me to subpoena the medical records to substantiate this. Do you want to tell us the truth?
All right. Yes, it's true, okay? I am having Charles' baby, but nothing happened before she left him. It's God's truth.
Your Honor, I have nothing further of this witness.
That's all I ever want in this courtroom is God's truth. You may step down. Anything further from the defendant?
Yes, Your Honor. I would like to recall Mr. McCall to the stand.
Step forward.
The defense has recalled Mr. McCall, probably to further explain Miss Corona's surprising admission that she is pregnant with his child, although she insists their affair began only after Mrs. McCall filed for divorce.
Still under oath. Go ahead.
Charles, would you tell the court about your relationship with Miss Corona after your separation from your wife?
After Linda kicked me out, I was still nuts about her. I was suicidal, and one night when I was out of my head, I had a bottle of pills in my hand, and Carol came home right before I was going to down them, and she stopped me. And she made me realize and make me believe that I had something to live for, that I was worth living for, that I had something to offer the world and to her. And then we just fell into each other's arms. But that was the first time, and it was after Linda kicked me out for good. I swear that's the truth.
Thank you. No further questions, Your Honor.
Mr. Dart.
Mr. McCall, do you really expect us to believe that you saw Miss Corona day in and day out for months and never touched her once?
Yes, that's exactly what I expect you to believe. That's what happened. I mean, this is not just some pickup. This is the real thing, and real thing waits for the right time.
I see. And when you wrote Second Woman Blues, you weren't referring to your affair with Miss Corona.
Come on, now, that is just a feel-sad song. It has nothing to do with Carol and me.
No, I'm sure it doesn't. Nothing further, Your Honor.
You may step down. Mr. Sturgis, anything further from the defendant?
Nothing further, Your Honor.
Mr. Dart, let me hear your closing remarks.
Your Honor, this case is clear. Mr. McCall left his wife and quit his job to be with his now pregnant lover. My client deserves a divorce on the grounds of mental cruelty and adultery. She asked for the car valued at $15,000, the silver at $7,000, the marital assets at $10,000, and $1,000 a month in spousal support. Thank you.
Mr. Sturgis.
Your Honor, it's obvious that Mr. McCall is a sincere, dedicated man who was deeply hurt by a heartless, materialistic woman who locked him out of his own home. The fact that he found happiness with someone else before his final divorce settlement shouldn't be held against him. He asked for divorce on grounds of mental cruelty, that he be awarded the car, the silver, and 75% of the marital assets, and no spousal support.
Thank you, counsel.
While Judge Keene reviews the testimony, we'll take a short break.